Well, hello! Welcome back to my channel. Just Shauna here to talk about some friggin' books. So it is still January right now. It's January 19th, and there's, like 2 weeks left, essentially. Still, almost 2 weeks. But my mother is visiting, and I know I'm not gonna do a whole heck of a lot of reading for the next little bit, so I might finish the 2 last books. Was it the 2 last books? Yes. I might finish the 2 last books that were on my TBR for the Read Your Shelves readathon, but I don't know. And at any rate, I have like 6 books here to talk about for the other books for the Read Your Shelves readathon and the Get Shit Done readathon. So I wanted to talk about them. I don't know what my hair is doing. Do I ever? No, that's why I constantly effing touch it. The first book I'm going to talk about was a buddy read with Kathy at Kathy Trithart. So here's the book. This is YA fantasy set in Victorian England. There is lots of magic in this. There are sorcerers, magicians, they're different. I don't know. I think wizards are different also, and I wasn't real sure about all of that. There's also fairies, vampires, I think mermaids, I'm pretty sure. We have a black main character who was adopted but originally purchased by a well-to-do English family, and the head of the household in that family is a sorcerer, and he was the Sorcerer Royal, which is like the head honcho of the sorcerers. So our main character is Zacharias. He was emancipated and taught magic by his father figure. Basically, his father figure wanted to prove that their prejudices, the other magicians and sorcerers' prejudices against other races learning magic was dumb and stupid. So he was like, look, I have this boy that I'm raising as my son, he can do magic. And eventually, well, not eventually, like at the very beginning of the book, he becomes the Sorcerer Royal. So he deals with a lot of prejudice and racism, and even though he's accepted to a point because he is the Sorcerer Royal, like he's the most powerful sorcerer, so they kind of have to give him some bit of respect, but most of the people in this society do keep him kind of at an arm's length. And then, things are trucking along and stuff's happening. He's getting threats on his life. People are trying to oust him because of their prejudice and racism, and they're like, he's not worthy. And there are levels of magic in a country in this world, and England's magic levels are being depleted, and he knows it's not because of him, but they're all like, ooh, I bet it's because we have a black Sorcerer Royal, so we're being punished. I don't know. It's dumb. It's racism. And so he is trying to figure out why the magic is dwindling. So Zacharias comes into contact through, plot points in the story with a young woman who's at a girls' school for witches, and she is biracial. She's English and Indian, and she was basically dumped off there by her dad, has no idea who her mom is. And in this school, basically, and in this world, on top of being racist and prejudiced, they are also sexist and think that women are too frail to do magic. But Zacharias, I'm sure because of his experience and knowing that just because you're black doesn't mean you can't do magic, he also has some different ideas about women doing magic. And he sees kind of what is being done to the girls at the school to make them suppress their magic. And he's basically like, nah, this can't happen, this is terrible, and I need to prove that women can do magic. And then hijinks ensue from there, and I'm not going to tell more details about the plot. So Zacharias had very little personality for me, and that was kind of a big problem. I understand why, when we are seeing him interact with others, why he is more reserved. It's a protection, you know what I mean? It's his defense. There are times where we are either in his head or we're seeing him in private, speaking with someone who's close to him, who's very familiar to him, and he still just never really had that much personality for me. He was just kind of there, and it was kind of a bummer. Prunella, however, the biracial girl that he comes across, was a delight. I loved Prunella. She was very unassuming, but at the same time, incredibly confident, and she's one of these people who feels no need to explain herself to anyone. She basically just goes about life with the expectation that if others don't immediately see how great she is, they'll catch up. She's cunning and intelligent and just incredibly capable, and I loved her. Plot also was a little bit of a difficulty for me. There's 3 or 4 different things going on, and they all seem incredibly important. The magic dwindling, people trying to kill him and assassinate him, people trying to oust him from his position, trying to teach Prunella magic to prove that, you know, he's got like all these different things going on. And it felt like they should have been focused on a little bit more intensely, and they just didn't feel all that serious in the book to the characters, but they were, or they should have been, I think. And there's a large fight scene towards the end, kind of like a, you know, the big boss battle, and it felt a little silly to me. On my 1 to 10, I gave this a 5.83, which translates to 3 Pushinicorns. I thought about continuing on with the series just to see what happens, simply because I love Prunella so much. And then I saw reviews, and non-spoilery at first, that the second book, like, Prunella is basically a side character. So, yeah, I don't care to read the rest of the series, I don't think. I feel like I talked about that for a long time. This is a classic. A lot of people have read it. Basically, dude makes a deal with the devil, essentially. He doesn't ever actually, like, meet the devil and, like, talk to the devil, but basically he bargains his way into eternal youth. And instead of himself aging, any signs of his aging and basically signs of his sins, things he's done wrong in life, show up on this portrait of him. Lord Henry Wotton, was that it? Wotton or Witten? Wotton was my favorite. He was, oh my God, so fun. He's very prominent in the first like half of the book, and then less so towards the end. But my God, he's so funny. So this is a classic, obviously. And back in these times, people liked to pussyfoot around things, beat around the bush. You know, you couldn't just come right out and say, somebody's doing drugs, or these men are gay together. They couldn't say that because, oh my God, polite society. It's, you know, very Victorian, whatever. So they kept like alluding to Dorian doing all these things and these scandalous things, but not saying what they were. And I was like, what are we? I think I get what we're leaning toward, but also I don't. But then randomly towards the end, we just stop pussyfooting around it, and they're like, opium. He's in an opium den. And I'm like, oh, okay. Now we're taking a total left turn and just confronting it face on, when for the rest of the book we weren't, and that just was a little weird to me. And then there was a section, I think it was like a whole chapter, kind of towards the end, where we're talking about Dorian and all of these things he's doing and interests he's getting and hobbies he's, you know, delving into. And it was so tedious. Oh my God. After like 2 pages, I literally skimmed the rest of that chapter. Like, okay, we're still just talking about dumb crap. Because we started going into detail about like some ship that he learned about. And did you know that the history of this ship and blah, blah, blah. And one time it sailed here. And then this other lady. And like introducing names of people and places and things that literally had no point to the larger plot. And I really liked it. I would have liked it more had those couple of, you know, complaints been changed. And I would have liked it a lot less if Lord Wotton wasn't in this, because, my God, he was so funny. Like, he's just so silly. My dear old Basil, you are much more than an acquaintance, and much less than a friend, a sort of brother, I suppose? Oh, brothers, I don't care for brothers. My elder brother won't die, and my younger brothers seem to never do anything else. So I will be keeping this copy of Dorian Gray. Is it one of my new faves? No, not necessarily, but I quite liked it. On my 1 to 10, I gave it a 6.83, which is 3.5 Pushinicorns. The next one that I completed, finally, was The Way of Thorn and Thunder by Daniel Heath Justice. I started this book back in November for Indigathon and did not complete it. I got about 46% of the way through. And then in December, I think I picked it up maybe once, but I didn't really, because I was reading other books for readathons in December. And then for this, for Read Your Shelves, I picked it up. Oh, and for Get Shit Done readathon. So this one is adult epic fantasy. It's an Indigenous author, so it's an own voices story because it is an Indigenous world. It mimics the story of the Trail of Tears. So we have an Indigenous people made up like races and tribes, but they're all indigenous to this land. They are connected to nature on a very deep spiritual, like life-giving level and magical level. We have a big bad who basically wants to become a god somehow. He has like this evil plan, and he tried before and it didn't quite work. but he messed up the world a little bit. And just over the years, mankind has just gotten more and more aggressive and violent with trying to take this land from these people. The main bad guy, the big bad, he is just a man. It's an incredibly complex and interesting world. The world building was truly astounding, in my opinion. To like the creatures, the types of people, the types of indigenous creatures, like everything. It was just so great. The lore and mythology was very intricate and great. I really enjoyed all of that, and that's what kept me reading the book, because my God, it is so long. But it was also a bind up. So it originally was a trilogy, and then this is the bind up of them all, and who I tell you, it's long. And it would have been much better for me in my reading experience if I had this in a physical copy, because there is a glossary. But I don't know about you, I don't love reading ebooks anyway, and to flip back and forth in an ebook to the glossary and then back to the, like, I'm not doing all of that. I'm just not. But if it was a physical book, it's just way easier to flip back to the glossary, and it was necessary in this book because the writing style just was not my favorite. So one tribe or race of creature, of person, would have like 4 different names that you could call them. And the author, they would use like 4 within like 2 pages. So you're talking about one character, and like within 2 pages, they're referred to as 4 different things. And it just got very jarring and confusing. I was like, what? It just, it threw me for a loop on a regular basis, and it was a little difficult for me to really like sink into the story because that kept pulling me out. This like, wait, what is that? You know what I mean? I got connected with some of the characters, but not as much as I would have liked to, and I think, again, it's probably the writing style that stopped me from really feeling that. But I did truly enjoy the story, and I personally thought the ending was pretty epic. I really enjoyed the ending. And the magic, I really liked seeing just the way they used magic and how deeply they were connected to the magic in this world. On my 1 to 10, I gave this a 6.8, which is 3.5 pushinicorns. So I tried reading This Side of Paradise, which I have had for a hot minute. I don't even know where I got this copy from, and I feel like I tried reading it once before, but I only got like a page or 2 in and I just put it down. This time around, I started listening to it on audio, and I listened for maybe 5 minutes and just felt very much like I did not give a crap. So I went to Goodreads and I checked out some reviews to see what people said about it. And a lot of people said it's genuinely a masterpiece in literature, but also that it's tedious and it's basically just the story. It's like his story of being a privileged white dude going to college. Nothing about that sounded like something I wanted to read. I just don't care. So I'm never gonna read this. Then I completed Monstress Volume 4, and I loved it. I mean, it's Monstress. This is a high fantasy graphic novel. I had forgotten a couple of things that had happened, so it took me a minute to kind of put some pieces together, just with the politics and stuff like that. There isn't necessarily a ton of action in this one. This one very much felt like a build-up, or I don't want to say a filler because it still mattered, like the things that were happening still mattered quite a bit to the overall plot, but it wasn't high action stuff for the most part. For graphic novels, the writing style category for my 1 to 10, I actually do kind of as writing style or like the story style, so the art style also. Monstress is always going to get a 10 out of 10 for me in that regard because I just absolutely love this artwork. On my 1 to 10, this got an 8.3, which is 5 pushinicorns. Who's surprised? Not me! Next up is Shadowcaster. I forgot the name of it for a second. This is book 2 in the Shattered Realms series by Cinda Chima, which is the continuation series to the Seven Realms series. This is YA fantasy. As I just said, it's a continuation in the series. At the start of this book, we basically are going back in time to the start of Flamecaster, and we're following different characters. And eventually we do catch up to the same time frame, and you see it happening. So I definitely recommend binge reading these because it had been so long since I read both of these books. And so when I read the first one and then I read the second one, I was like, oh, okay. Oh, I remember that. Okay. So I'm like, oh, they are here. So now we're caught up to the timeline in Flamecaster, like where we left off. There are characters that were in Flamecaster that we do not see at all in Shadowcaster. I know they're going to be in the other books, but yeah, there's like 2 characters, I think, total that were not in this book at all. So you have no idea what happened to them or what's going on with them. One of the main characters that we do follow in Shadowcaster is Princess Alyssa, and I love her. I love her so much. She's just a really fun time, and she's one of those characters who is just completely herself and knows who she is cool with who she is, and just very self-assured. And I love that in a character. We have a character named Hal who is very Kale-esque, but better, much better, which is not hard because I did not like Kale. I just feel like Kale was always just so blah, so bleh. And this character Hal is like similar in the fact that he just is like a good little soldier, you know, and wants to do what he's supposed to do for his family and whatnot. But he's just much less boring to me. I don't know why. He just had more life to him. And then there's a character named Brian. I'm not going to say anything about like who these people are or what they do, but I really like Brian. Towards the beginning, he was kind of just there, but as the story progressed and you saw more and more of him, he's just so funny. I appreciate that Cinda Chima shows us good and bad characters on both sides. So we very much have the good guys and the bad guys, right? But on both ends, she shows people that are good and that are bad within these, you know, camps. On my 1 to 10, I gave this a 7.16, which is 4 pushinicorns. And then I completed Anger is a Gift by Mark Oshiro. This is a YA contemporary that is dealing with racial issues, prejudice, racism in general, and police brutality. We have a positive representation of a group of LGBT characters. We have ace representation, trans representation, non-binary, lesbian, gay, all the things in that regard, which was really nice to see. We also have disability representation, but I wasn't certain how well that was done. I did see some reviews that mentioned that they didn't think it was great because of one scene in particular, but I don't have a disability, so I cannot say. And all of the LGBT rep, while I thoroughly enjoyed seeing these characters, and it made sense that they were all friends and whatnot, but it would have felt a little more realistic if there were nobody at all got bullied or even picked on or had to deal with microaggressions or comments at all about that, especially our main character, who is a young black man living in Oakland, and he just was accepted by everybody, it felt like. Like in the black community, being a gay guy, often, especially if you're from a neighborhood like that, it's not usually just that easy. There's this horrible stigma a lot of the time. Not everywhere, of course. And it made sense that like his family, his own family and people close to him were understanding and great, and I loved seeing that. But that he went to school and just nobody ever gave him any crap. And it just never was a conversation. He never talked about any situation, having dealt with that and whatever. And I'm not saying that when you do a book like this that you have to talk about every single potential thing that could come up for these people, but it's a pretty long book and we had the time. You know what I mean? Like the author had the time where they could have had that conversation at some point, and they didn't. And I wasn't really sure why. I did see somewhere in some of the reviews that this was initially meant to be a dystopian that got turned into just a contemporary. So I wonder if maybe that's part of it. Because if you're writing a dystopian, that's more of a made up world, obviously. And you can kind of take some liberties and create a world where this type of thing doesn't happen. Maybe where it isn't a problem. But it ended up being a contemporary, and it was dealing with real world issues. And it's long enough where we had the time that we could have taken to have that real world conversation at some point. It didn't have to be like half the book or anything, but just a conversation about it. But it wasn't like problematic or anything. I just would have preferred to see it different. And I listened to this on audio, like I said, and I don't think it helped me because I didn't love the narrator. The dialogue already, and I read part of it, like the actual book, I read maybe like 5 or so chapters in physical form because I wanted to compare and see if it was just the audiobook or if it was just the dialogue in general, and it was kind of just the dialogue in general. It felt very stilted and cliched a bit, and then the narrator just did not help that. It felt so stilted. I don't know if he was a white guy or not, but he just sounded super like, hey, yo, why are you doing that? Like, you know what I mean? It just wasn't great. The plot also felt pretty contrived sometimes, just cliches abounding, and didn't love that. Things happening just way too conveniently from time to time. But yeah, the dialogue just, ooh, there were times where, and this isn't literally what they said, like these weren't the words that came out of their mouth, but it felt very like, oh wow, I didn't even think of that when I said that. I did not mean to harm. Please, in the future, always check me because I would never want to harm anyone. And I never even thought of that perspective. Thank you so much for teaching me this valuable lesson today. It's not literally what they said, but it felt like that. It just was like, ooh, what? Again, I don't, am I old? Do teenagers actually talk like that? I don't feel like they do. It just didn't feel natural. Didn't feel natural at all. And our main character, Moss, I just felt like he was kind of the worst sometimes. And then his mom confesses something that it was very much like mirroring something that happened with Esperanza. He immediately forgives his mom, which I wasn't mad that he forgave his mom. It's his mom. But he didn't even think to himself, hey, this is exactly why I'm mad at Esperanza right now. It wasn't even a thought in his head. And then he just continued being mad at her. And like, yeah, it just was a little ridiculous. And something happens at the end, and his reaction with Esperanza, and his reaction just, did not love. I did not love it. I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil, but he was a little bit ridiculous. Spoiler free, but magnets don't work like that. Pins in your legs don't work like that. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I just generally didn't feel like there was enough nuance to this. And I mean, for the book being this big, I feel like it could have done a much better job of the nuances of these things, these situations, these topics. And I just don't think it did. And I hate comparing, but when you read a book like this, I'm sorry, but it's a little hard not to compare it to The Hate You Give or Dear Martin, books like that. They're all in the same vein. Why contemporary is dealing with these same topics. And I mean, The Hate You Give just is about the same length. Far better job. And even Dear Martin, which is like a novella, way shorter than this, dealt with way more of the nuances and complexities of these situations than I feel like this book did. Much more impactful, both of those were, for me personally. It just felt too surface level and kind of cliched and contrived. I'm really happy for everyone who connected with this story and loves it, because while I personally thought it was a little too surface level and not complex enough, it is still talking about important things. And I did really appreciate the discussion basically about justified rage. And, you know, like you see on the news sometimes, you know, people forgiving their daughter's murderer and like hugging in the courtroom. And is that a beautiful thing to be able to forgive like that? For sure. It is. If you're able to do that, that's a beautiful thing for you, for your heart, I'm sure, and whatever. And for that person, obviously, that's a bonus for them that you're forgiving them. But does someone have to forgive someone for that? No, absolutely not. And I think it's kind of a dangerous thing that we get into, like praising people so much for that level of forgiveness, because you're not obligated to forgive someone who did something like that. You know what I mean? And how you deal with that internally is up to you. And I think it's okay to allow people to have some justified rage with stuff like this. And so I appreciated that. I thought that was done pretty well. Because it's like the whole, as long as I say I'm sorry, then all is better. And like, no, not always. That just continues the cycle of abuse. On my 1 to 10, I gave this a 5.3, which is a low, but still a 3 Pushinicorn rating. Okay, finally done. As always, thank you so much for your time. Hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.